Thank you very much, Felix, for providing this perspective of irrigation in the challenge of water scarcity. And we know, in fact, that the irrigation has been pivotal for the augmentation of food production. So the food supply worldwide, 40% of the food supply worldwide is over almost 20% of the arable land. And you have highlighted also the importance of technology, the various strategies for increased efficiency and productivity. And here is where we have a dilemma. Generally, the increasing in production through the expansion of irrigation has exacerbated most of the time the scarcity of water. So this dilemma is what will be addressed in the high-level committee of the Joint High-Level Committee on Ministerial Council of the League of Arab States of Water and Agriculture that will be on the 23rd and 24th. It's a high-level segment, let's say, of this Cairo Water Week. This is an interesting aspect to be further discussed. And now I would like to introduce Ali Abousabaa, Director General of ICARDA. Ali Abousabaa assumed ICARDA's Director General position in October 2016. He brings 33 years of strategic leadership in sustainable development, operational and policy-based lending and project management, spanning 35 countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. As Vice President of the African Development Bank, Abousabaa led the preparation and execution of the bank's key strategies. He was also in charge of resource mobilization and management of an 11 billion portfolio in the areas of agriculture, water, natural resource management, climate change, infrastructure, women and youth, and governance, making transformational impact on the lives of millions of people in Africa. He has established a global network of international partners on development, including World Bank, United Nations, European Union, African Union, bilateral agencies such as GIZ, the FEED, and NORAD, and non-governmental organizations. Ali, the floor is yours. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And Pasquale, thank you for the introduction. I'm coming at a different time between the president of IDRC, who gave a very well-animated and very strategic and visionary presentation, and His Excellency, Minister of Water, who will soon be speaking. So I'll try and be brief and focus so that we get to the bottom line of the presentations for today through the Excellency. It's a pleasure to be here with the Cairo Water Week. I'm going to be speaking about a dry arc initiative and the part of the work that ICARDA does in the whole space of the dry areas. But just to get a sense why this is important, I want to first spend a few seconds on why the dry areas my apology, on why the dry areas matter. This is the place that has 47% of the world's land surface. It grows about 44% of the world's food, and it accommodates 50% of the livestock population on Earth. It has 1/3 of the world's population. Half of them are living under chronic poverty. And it has less than 8% of the total renewable water resource, with an average of about 1,300 cubic meters annually per person. Now, these dry areas naturally suffer from chronic water shortages, but also high temperatures. And the projections that with the continued trajectory of heat increase
and the global warming, we expect to see almost a loss of about 20 million tons of potential grain production every year going into 2050. And the impact on land degradation is going to be huge. We actually lose about 23 hectares of land per minute. So it's really a very catastrophic scenario. Now, when we think about the population growth, by 2050, there will be half a billion more people living in the dry areas. The youth will constitute about 20% of those people. And then there will also be the increased pressure of more water scarcity, limited food, and of course, declining rainfall. So if we focus on the region, the MENA region in particular, we see that the water scarcity is becoming even more critical, and the per capita share by 2050 is expected to go to an average about 550 cubic meter annually per person. Now, about 80% of the total water, fresh water, is actually consumed by agriculture. So it's important for us to actually focus on that dimension and see what can be done. This graph shows you the general state of several African countries as well as some Europeans, and the situation is clear. The majority of them live below the absolute levels of stress, and the picture continues to worsen over time. Now, this map shows the areas that are going to be hardest hit by increased temperature, and we see the part of the world where Middle East and North Africa is really among the hardest hit. Now, just to share with you some very specific information that we measure in ICARDA from our weather station in next to Aleppo in Syria. Between 1980 and 2020, there has been an average of 2 degrees rise. This is actual measurement. These are not models. These are not forecasts. These are really actual measurements of how the temperatures have been behaving over time. And corresponding to this, we have seen about 50 to 60 millimeters of rain drop from the average of 350 to less than 300 now. And of course, this has direct impact on our ability to produce food. So when you look at these factors combined with the high unemployment in the region, the food and nutritional insecurity due to inappropriate levels of distribution of food, but also bad habits in terms of the way we eat. If you look at the demographic changes and how it is impacting our life, and if you look at the land degradation and the speed with which we're losing land cover and fertile soil, when you look at globally the loss of agro-biodiversity and the impact it's going to have on our lives, we really have a perfect storm in place. And that calls for a very different approach, given that we have less than actually 10 harvests between now and when we have to report on the SDGs. Now, these changing patterns will actually lead to more dry lands. We will see emergence of new pests and disease that will continue to affect the food that we grow and the food that remains for us to be able to eat. So all of this really calls for faster move on the different actions that different key stakeholders are able to bring. I mentioned there are actually 10 harvests remaining before 2020. So it's obvious we need to adapt. We cannot change what is going to happen, at least not fast enough to avoid the negative impact that we're seeing. And it is also important to recognize that it's not just about increased temperatures and reduced rainfall, it's also about rising levels of sea that will impact the coastal cities, and the total combined impact of all of these things will actually result more than $1 trillion loss per year until 2050. Now, it has been mentioned agriculture is the largest user of water, but it also matters what you grow, which crops you put in the ground, and at the end, also what choices you make when you eat. So science has a very important role to play. I think it's important to squeeze efficiency in water utilization, distribution, and all of those things are critically important. We need to do them, and we need to do them faster, we need to do them better, and then we need to leverage all the technologies that are available. But there are also the track of being able to leverage the agrobiodiversity and the very rich genetic material and resources that are available to come up with new crops that are more resistant to pests and disease, that would consume less water, that give you higher resistance to the incidence of drought and prolonged events of this nature. So, traditionally this part of the world have consumed, more of, of wheat in different forms, whether it's wheat, whether it's bread wheat or durum wheat. Barley is the traditional crop, lentils and chickpea, fava bean, of course, are all critical. But we in ICARDA, we continue to develop these crops to make sure that at least the region has sufficient global supply of improved germplasm that will continue to feed in the agriculture system to cope with these changes. So you can deploy improved, irrigation techniques. It's fine. You can save, up to 85% of water. You can actually have good experiences in some of the very water scarce countries like Oman, Jordan, and many others. You can leverage ICT and remote sensing to really be able to do more of a precision agriculture and smart technologies. You can leverage on some of the water efficient technologies. One of the things that we're very proud of is the raised bed machine that has jointly been developed between ICARDA and the government of Egypt, ARC, and is largely being scaled out in a national project. This has potential to reduce irrigation water by 25%, increase yields by almost 30%, reduce seed rates by 50%, and the total combined use of the package as a whole, because it's management, it's the equipment, it's the improved seeds and the improved management technique. You can actually increase the water use efficiency by 72%. Now, you could also use non-traditional forms of fodder like cactus that has traditionally been used in a very limited form. Now you're able to use it, at least some forms of it that has no spines, as animal feed. But what is going to make a huge impact, much stronger than all of what I've just discussed, is the choices we make about the food we eat. And I think that's very important to look at some of those options, because nature has limits on how much you can stretch it. So this graph shows you the number of liters you actually need to produce one egg, 217 liters, as opposed to 1 kg, 1,550 almost liters of water to produce 1 kg of beef. So, and of course, a range of other choices in between, whether it's maize, chicken, rice, or potato. So I think it's important for governments, for policy makers, for decision makers, for NGOs, for all of those to work together to be able to inform and raise awareness of the people so that they are actually conscious about the behavioral issues and how this impacts on water. Many of you are familiar with the Eat Lancet report that came out a few months ago, and it explains how the change in dietaries and the eating habits of people could affect and reduce the pressures on the natural resource, but also improve our health, reduce the incidence of obesity, improve the general natural growth of the children, and deal with issues such as stunting, but more importantly, the impact it will have on reducing the total water consumption globally. So this has actually prompted a number of centers from the CGIR, many of you are familiar with, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, to come together and think about what is it that we can do in this part of the world. And we looked at what we would like to characterize as the dry arc. Dry arc is the area that extends all the way from Morocco, maybe southern parts of Europe, stretching through the Middle East and North Africa, Southwest Asia, and goes all the way up to China. And I think what we recognize is that individually, for the past 50 years, what we have done has not taken us far enough. A focus on one form of technology is not sufficient to deal with the magnitude of the problem. You need to combine skills and experiences. You need to combine science from different organizations. You need to bring in solutions that cuts across a number of agroecologies, if you focus on water, on irrigated systems, if you focus on rain-fed systems, if you even focus on the agro-pastoral systems, even take it to the extreme and look at desert farming. Yes, desert farming. As we go into the future, we'll see more of those extreme situations, and it is best that we start to prepare for that. So, under a dry arc initiative that we're seeking to promote under the CGIAR right now, is a process to bring in skills and capacity from 8 centers. You see them listed: CIMIT, ICARDA, IMI, ICRISAT, IITA, IFPRI, ILRI, and World Fish, in a manner and in full partnership with the NARS, the National Research Systems, with the private sector, with the rural communities. Yes, they have to be part of the solution. And of course, with the other players who are able to bring in knowledge and science to the systems, and many of the advanced research institutions. Now, the idea there is to combine all of these solutions, test them in the 4 different agroecologies I spoke about. The view here is to immediately mobilize technologies that have high potential to bring about a difference and impact, and start to scale it out, working with the development institutions like the World Bank, like the African Development Bank, like the European Commissions, and many of the Arab funders, to be able to bring in funding to scale out the implementation of these technologies. But going beyond the model where individual centers have worked on their own, traditionally ICARDA is known in this part of the world, but with partnership with others, what we want to do is to bring in a collective of centers to work together, to bring in science and technologies, and to be able to come up with the future food systems that will help this region. We hope to be able to provide information and this combined knowledge to support decision making for ministers, for countries, and for those who care about making a change, to be able to accelerate the scaling up of proven technology, and of course develop more and more technologies that will be needed for the future. Recently, there has been a major announcement led by the Gates Foundation to double the size of the CGIAR from $1 billion to $2 billion, and with very important encouraging commitments made by many of the traditional supporters, including from the World Bank. Now, what is important is that these are all issues that require combined and collective work from all of those who are actually interested in this space. So with those few remarks, I thank you very much.